Um, Hello, Andrew. Welcome to the Sutliffian Report. You're one of the incredible writers that I enjoy reading and listening to, because you are also a host with BlogTalk Radio and our wonderful Global Patriot Radio group. I read your article, Muslim Professor Claims Islamic Scholars Have Placed Too Much Emphasis on Jihad is Violent, in Front Page Magazine, with some curiosity. I pride myself on thinking I stay up on a lot, but you always beat me. I had not even heard of Critical Connections. I'm curious about what brought them to your awareness.
Well, it's great to be on the show with you, Paul. I always enjoy talking with you and being interviewed by you. Well, the particular group, Critical Connections, which hosted this webinar with a Mount Holyoke College professor, Sohail Hashmi, professor of Islamic history and Islamic law, came to my attention simply through looking for these various events, and as part of my writing my work for the Middle East Forum with their Campus Watch. Campus Watch at the Middle East Forum focuses on critiquing, analyzing Middle East studies in the United States, at the world of academia, what it's saying about Islam, the West, Israel, what agendas are being promoted there, what sort of propaganda perhaps is taking place, what's the state of Middle East studies in general. And so we follow academic presentations like this of this professor from Mount Holyoke College, Sohail Hashmi, and we analyze them, we write about them to try to inform the larger public about what is being taught in the ivory tower academia in Middle East studies, and about Islam in particular and other related issues of Islam's relationship to the West and to Israel, and again, what agendas are being advanced? Are they sort of for American Western interests or against American Western interests? In general, a liberal worldview, right? Advancing free societies. How is that being treated in Middle East studies? And so I came across this particular presentation just simply following social media. I can follow online various groups or on Twitter individuals, and they'll post whatever events are of interest to them or that they're involved in. This particular event I came across, I forget, I think it was on some Twitter account. Someone was highlighting it, that this was an interesting event. And so I looked at it, and the Middle East Forum's Campus Watch agreed that they thought they wanted to have this event covered. And so it was put on by this group I had not heard of before called Critical Connections, which is located in Western Massachusetts, sort of near the Pioneer Valley, or in that Pioneer Valley area, as it's called, of the Connecticut River. That's precisely where I went to school, at Amherst College in that area, which, along with Mount Holyoke College, is part of the so-called Five Colleges, this academic consortium of Amherst College, Mount Holyoke College, then Smith College in Northampton, and Hampshire College, and the University of Massachusetts at Amherst, the flagship University of Massachusetts campus. These all form the Five College Consortium in the Connecticut River Valley, the Pioneer River Valley, as it's called. And this Critical Connections group is out there. It's actually headed by an individual, a South Asian individual, Pakistani American individual, I believe, by the name of Maleki Samdani, who actually shares with me a similar degree at the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy. I learned in our biography that she also went to the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy at Tufts University, an international relations program, indeed the nation's oldest international relations program. And she has a sort of a background in non-governmental organizations, NGOs, humanitarian work, and has in recent years formed this group called Critical Connections, which is interested in analyzing issues of Islam in the United States and the broader world. So she interviews people like this professor from Mount Holyoke College, and they discuss topics of concern to Muslims in the wider world.
Now, you mentioned her co-moderator, Malhaka Samdani, who is a Karachi University student. The person we're talking about is Rutaba Tariq. I'm sorry. And I find that interesting. We have a Pakistani university student here in the States, or is she?
She's as you indicated, she goes to Karachi University in Pakistan, and she called into the webinar or participated from Pakistan itself. She's a Karachi University student, master's student there in Pakistan, and has participated in what they call the Model Organization of Islamic Cooperation, a student organization for the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, the OIC, this 57 member nation international grouping, also including the nation of Palestine, the Palestinian territories recognized as a nation in the OIC. And the OIC is indeed, with it's 56 nation states, as well as this Palestine, but certainly with 56 Muslim majority recognized states, it's the largest international organization in the world outside of the United Nations. Only the United Nations is larger. And the OIC then forms within the United Nations a key voting bloc. If you think of particularly issues involving Israel, there's only one Jewish state, Israel, in the United Nations, but there are 56 members of the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, the OIC, headquartered in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia.
Wow. That's interesting. You state that Sohail Hashmi was the presenter, and the topic was really jihad. My question, after reading that, I was your piece on this. I found it very interesting because it really comes out and says some important things. So was Professor Sohail Hashmi truly straightforward in telling the entire truth when he talked about jihad?
Well, he had a presentation where he was comparing and contrasting jihad, the Islamic concept of warfare, with the just war concept of warfare with which people are familiar in the West, this Christian developed doctrine, which has indeed become sort of the basis of international law on warfare, the rules of war that have sort of become the international norm, issues like not harming civilians and so forth, avoiding harm to civilians, or treatment of prisoners and so forth, or the justifications for going to war. All of this was actually, as Hashmi himself indicated in the presentation, grew out of this Western Judeo-Christian just war theory. And that's become then the basis of modern international law. If you look to the United Nations Charter, the principle that you may only use military force for self-defense. Okay, you can't have wars of aggression. That's of course a basic just war principle, that you may only engage in warfare for right intention. You have to have a moral intention of preserving life, protecting life. St. Augustine, for example, in the 5th century, in his writings on theology, he wrote about just warfare being an act of love, that you may only engage in warfare precisely to protect human life. So that the violence of warfare is something that's sort of fundamentally to be avoided, fundamentally evil, but that avoidance, that imperative to avoid violence and to kill and destroy, can be outweighed if you have a threat that is going to destroy, threaten human dignity, threaten human life. But so you have to engage in a moral inquiry about, is your use of force, that destruction that you're going to have in your use of force, going to be outweighed and therefore justified by a greater danger, a greater threat to human life. So that's sort of the basis of just war. I mean, in the presentation, he noted that the New Testament in the Bible, the Christian scriptures, are indeed very sort of pacifist inclined. I mean, Jesus never held any military or political power. He lived his life as a shepherd. He emphasized peacemaking. I mean, he said, blessed are the peacemakers in the Sermon on the Mount. Also saying things like turn the other cheek and so forth. So there's a big emphasis in the New Testament on avoiding violence. So Christians have always had to struggle with warfare because there's such an emphasis in the New Testament on love and avoiding violence. So there is indeed a tradition of Christian pacifism. I mean, some Christians throughout history have chosen pacifism, that you just should simply renounce any force, any violence, and that's the command of Jesus. But the mainstream of Christian thinking has indeed been the just war tradition, with which Christians have had to struggle. That, and sometimes you do indeed, precisely to love your fellow man as yourself, to protect human life, you have to resort to violence as a form of defense. I mean, just like domestically we have police forces, internationally we also have to have a use of force with the military at times in a fallen world to defend against aggressors. And you can see that, for example, as well in the New Testament, that Jesus never condemns soldiers. I mean, he meets with soldiers and so forth, like the Roman centurion he has a discussion with, but he never says to such soldiers, don't be a soldier. It's sinful to be a soldier. I mean, he merely says to soldiers, simply take your wages, don't extort things from people, don't engage in evil. And then later, of course, in Romans, in chapter 13 of Romans, the Apostle Paul has perhaps the key text on government for Christians, that government is the sword bearer, that Christians have to respect the government, the state, as a sword bearer that's there to uphold the good and to protect people from wrong. So the instrument of the state has this protective function for Christians. So he indicated that in the presentation, and also indicated there as well that in jihad, the main objective for Muslims is to advance Islamic law, to protect, to advance and promote an Islamic state and this Islamic rule. And the thinking in Islam historically, classically, has been that Islamic law, Sharia, this Islamic state, really is this divinely mandated law, and it's really what God wants from humanity. It's really the best law, the best society, and so it's really a blessing for all of humanity. So therefore, Muslims should want to, as they would see it, liberate humanity by bringing them all under Islamic law, under Sharia. And that's why precisely historically in Islam, the term for Islamic conquest is precisely the Arabic fatah, which literally means opening. And that's indeed today the largest group in the Palestinian Liberation Organization has always been Fatah, which in Arabic means opening, which is this concept that we're opening the world to Islam, which is therefore a form of liberation, right? If we conquer Spain or the Holy Land or whatever, we're opening that part of the world to Islam and to Islamic rule, and the people there will benefit from that. So he indicated that. I think, however, he comes from a Muslim background himself. I think he sort of was shading things in his presentation in a real favorable sense towards Islam, because those are then two fundamentally different goals in just war on the one hand and Islamic law on the other hand, that the purpose of just war is this universal protection of all human life. So if you think of, say, World War II, if you're fighting the Nazi regime, to fight the Nazis and to protect people, say, like the Jews from genocide, or the peoples of the Soviet Union from enslavement, to destroy this power, the Third Reich, that's endangering Europe, in particular in the wider world, with its conquests. That has nothing to do with any particular religion or belief system or particular form of law, right? There's a general principle there: protect all human life, as depicted in movies like, Saving Private Ryan by Steven Spielberg. There's where you have Catholics and Protestants and Jews fighting in the American Army, this American squad and their infantry squad. They're all fighting for in this combined goal together against the Germans and the Nazis, just for this general principle of human freedom. On contrast, in jihad, you're really advocating this sectarian law, this theocracy, all under the assumption that, oh, this is really a blessing. This is really the best form of governments. governance. This is the best religion, the final faith. And so you're just assuming that Islam's really true and the best government. And so you're now going to fight in the name of that religion. So, and you're willing to use force in the name of that belief system, of that law, which, as history has shown, can be very brutal force. And as he himself indicated in his presentation, there's often thinking in Islam that this glorious end of Sharia justifies the means, so I can engage in, terrorism or whatever I got to do to advance this glorious end of Sharia. So those are really two fundamentally different goals.
It's interesting. The opening part, I think I've seen it a couple times, but it kind of surprises me to think that they would almost state that the opening is not part of jihad or fatah, as you're saying. The definition of jihad is the war on non-Muslims. So it's interesting.
Well, he made that argument precisely in the classical thinking and the historic thinking. Now he argued that precisely Muslims themselves in the modern world, he said, are such wars in the name of jihad, is that compatible with modern international law, like in the United Nations Charter, which, as he said, is really sort of the final outgrowth of just war thinking. If you think of modern international law, as he was indicating, Sohail Hashmi from Mount Holyoke College, it really is at its base a Western creation, right? So it really comes out of this Judeo-Christian Western civilization. So at its root is really this biblical thinking. And so therefore, this Judeo-Christian just war thinking, which, neither in the Jewish scriptures nor in the Christian scriptures is there any mandate to use violence to conquer other people and convert them or bring them under a sectarian rule. Jews on the one hand are not interested in conquering other people to bring them under Jewish rule or to make them Jewish or anything. And then again in the Christian scriptures, with this belief in this Jewish Messiah, Jesus, there again, there's this emphasis on peace among all human beings. The late great Rabbi Jeffrey Sachs, the British rabbi who died just this year or earlier this year, or earlier this year it was. He noted in one of his presentations that in Judaism there's always sort of these two poles, that on the one hand you have a particular Jewish people that has its own unique Jewish culture, a Jewish religious law, but then Judaism believes that all of humanity is made in God's image, and that Jews have a mission from God to be a light unto the nations, to uphold this universal morality. And so Judaism teaches precisely that all of the world has to learn how to live with unique nations on the one hand, having their own cultures, but on the other hand, they live according to a universal law of human dignity, so of equality. So the different nations have to learn how to live together as equals. That biblical thinking, and so and therefore in the Jewish scriptures, there you have a lot of warfare and a lot of violence. But the Jewish scriptures teach that such violence is always justified only as part of God's vengeance against evil. Like God condemns the pagan tribes, the Canaanites in the Holy Land, because they've done so many disgusting things and offended God. And he tells the Jews, go in there and clean it out, and expel these people from this land. And Jewish teaching from, say, the Talmud says that even in fighting, say, the pagan tribes, where God says go in and just wipe them out, that even there the Jews had to leave some sort of way of escape for such pagans to get away, right? If they want to just run away and just leave the Holy Land, and then we take over the Holy Land, this promised land for Jews, they can, and we'll not pursue them, right? So we'll only fight them if they stay. So even there's a moral teaching that we're not supposed to, you're supposed to allow the option of retreat, the option of people to get away. But there, the violence of the Jews is presented as being part of God's vengeance, like, say, the vengeance of God in the flood of Noah, right? That there are times, or the vengeance of God on ancient Egypt when they refused to let the the Jews go, the 10 plagues. I mean, so it's even in the Jewish scriptures, violence it has a moral teaching. There's a moral reason for violence, that there's been some great evil. It's not because God wants, say, violence to be used for the Jews to go out to try to convert people to any belief system, any religion, or particular law, but it's only, again, this punishment of evil. That's fundamentally different from this jihad teaching. And Hashmi himself indicated that modern Muslim scholars have had to try to reanalyze this tradition to try to bring it in conformity with what we accept in the modern world today in international law, based on this just war, that you can't have wars of aggression anymore.
I'm curious how he's here in the West. I'm curious how his did the Pakistani moderator, did she kind of fight back with us a little bit, or?
Well, see, both he and also the moderator, Malika Samdani, here in the United States, is this South Asian Pakistani American woman. So, both of these individuals are very Western, as well as the other individual you indicated at Karachi University. She was also very much from a sort of a Western background, part of sort of like the Westernized elite of Pakistan, right? I mean, the elite of Pakistan going to these universities would often come from a Western tradition, and so they would be precisely the kind of people with whom you could argue. I mean, this Malaki Samdani, as I indicated before, she went to the Fletcher School like I did, right? So all the people at the Fletcher School are very much from this kind of, you might say, globalist background. They're all the people we get there. It's a very international school with people all over the world, but they all share this very kind of elite, you might call it kind of like a Davos World Economic Forum mindset, commitment to like international cooperation, international law, international norms. I mean, these are all precisely the kind of people who would later go to the United Nations or, international organizations, or serve in diplomatic corps and so forth. So at least the sort of the ambiance of the school is this idea of like the United Nations, the sort of the ideals of the United Nations of human rights and international law and respect for norms. And I mean, you'd have people there from like the Chinese Communist Party, their diplomatic service and so forth. One of my roommates was once a Chinese foreign ministry official. All these people, of course, are in the Chinese Communist Party. I mean, they might not, their presentation of human rights or international law, of course, is not going to ultimately be a very Western presentation, but at least they'll at least talk the language, or they'll at least try to operate within that framework, right? I mean, that's the, so you can go, is
that part of what happened? Do you think that's part of what happened? This is where I get a little interested with this coverage. Did Sohail Hashmi, I mean, he sounds like he tried to smooth out or lessen what jihad actually means. So that's what I'm trying to understand.
Yeah, I think you're obviously right, and that would be a point of suspicion, that he was obviously grasping for a sort of a modern understanding of Islam, modern understanding of jihad, and he mentioned how modern Muslim scholars have had to grapple with this and have tried to look at the doctrine of Islam and try to reinterpret it so jihad would be understood as merely defensive warfare. I mean, he himself, for example, argued that he believed that according to Islamic doctrine, weapons of mass destruction, in particular nuclear weapons, should not be permitted. You saw that was mentioned in the article. I think that's a questionable issue. I mean, if we think about it, I mean, Pakistan, of course, precisely where this co-moderator was coming in from. Pakistan, since 1998, has its own declared nuclear deterrent, which before then was undeclared. Pakistan has developed nuclear weapons. And then, of course, we have the Islamic Republic of Iran, even more worryingly, in recent decades, has, of course, had this nuclear program and has shown really every indication to develop nuclear weapons and to deploy them on missiles. And there doesn't seem to be any great pushback from Muslims there saying, that's not Islamic or you shouldn't do that. He was arguing on this principle that, well, in Islamic law, there is indeed a significant body of literature that says that you can't harm civilians. Okay, so there is a distinction between combatants and non-combatants, like in just war, right? That, in just war, you're supposed to protect life, right? Which means that you have to try to avoid killing non-combatants. You may only use that violence that is necessary to achieve the objective of peace, of defeating an enemy, defeating a threat. So you're supposed to aim at just the combatants. You're not supposed to just go out and kill civilians. I think there's a lot to be said there. I think it's far murkier than what he presented. For example, Robert Spencer himself has noted that, there are different hadith, these canonical sayings about the life of Muhammad that sort of indicate differing perspectives on whether you can kill civilians or not. There's some hadith that indicate, like, when he and his Islamic army attacked the Khaybar oasis, this Jewish oasis in the 7th century Arabian Peninsula, that Muhammad just gave orders of going in for a night attack, said, look, just kill anyone, and if you can't really tell if someone's a civilian or not because it's night, whatever, who cares? They're just all part of the same community, just go in and kill. You have also there's really been no, if you think of Hamas or Hezbollah, that they are indeed terrorist groups, and they've engaged in all manner of terrorist attacks, of suicide bombing. Just recently, once again, all these indiscriminate mass rocket attacks, right? And you don't hear from the Muslim world, any great outcry against Hamas or Hezbollah.
And 10 or 20% of those rockets fall on their own people.
Falling on their own people, so they don't seem particularly concerned about their own people getting killed. And indeed, when I was doing research, there's this, sometimes you hear about this famous fatwa against suicide bombing that was supposedly put out back in like it was back in like 2014 or so.
Yes.
and put out by this Pakistani Muslim who now lives in the United Kingdom. I'm trying to remember his name. He heads this Minhaj, what's it called again? Institution in Pakistan. So he put out this fatwa that supposedly was supposed to say that suicide bombing's wrong. And I read it and wrote an article about it for Jihad Watch, and showed that it really didn't say that. For one thing, all the references to suicide in this fatwa, they merely talk about suicide in the normal sense that someone kills themselves because they're like depressed or something. And Islam, of course, is against that, as it's a biblical teaching. Your life is sacred. You're not supposed to kill yourself. But groups like Hamas, they don't view suicide bombing as what we call suicide bombing as a form of suicide, but they view them precisely as martyrdom operations, shahid operations. They really view them as the same way the Japanese viewed kamikaze attacks in World War II, that you're not committing suicide, but rather you're just engaging in an attack which the nature of it is such that it costs you your life, right? That
it causes you to go to glory in their belief structure.
Right, you become a martyr, but it's really just a manifestation of what the Catholic Church in moral teaching calls double effect, right? That your primary effect, your primary intent is to inflict harm on the enemy, but it simply has the double effect in the way you conduct the attack, that you conduct the attack in a suicidal mission, such that you conduct the attack that you really have no practical hope of escape. You're going to die. But, that's no different from, say, kamikaze pilots in World War II, or indeed many other people, Americans or Western soldiers have also engaged in missions where you go on some attack and, that there's very little chance you're going to come out alive. You're going to hold a position or something. Or, for example, that...
My biggest issue with that whole strain is that these are not, in general, people following this doctrine generally do not wear uniforms. They do not belong to a particular military entity. They present themselves sometimes as civilians,
Right.
So the concept of just attacking the military just kind of flies out there.
Well, that's another principle of just war in distinguishing sort of a derivative principle of just war that's historically been accepted, that in order to distinguish between combatants and non-combatants, combatants have to identify themselves and wear uniforms. And you have to separate yourself from the non-combatants. I mean, precisely with Hamas, they're using these human shields, right? They're mixing all of their military facilities within civilians. You're not supposed to do that. That's a war crime. You are indeed supposed to try to separate yourself, because otherwise I can't fight my enemy without killing civilians. So there, and precisely as you're saying with, say, suicide bombers, you go in as a civilian and you engage in these terrorist attacks, and I can't tell who is going to attack me or not. But all these tactics, as Hashmi himself indicated in his presentation, have been justified by the Islamic principle of necessity, of darura, as it's said in Arabic. That again, if as he indicated, that if this end of Sharia, if that's your ultimate goal, is Sharia, this glorious Islamic state, this is glorious Islamic law, whereas the ultimate end in just war, in contrast, is precisely the preservation of human life. See, so there's the fundamental flaw, I guess, in his thinking, or the fundamental division between Islamic warfare, jihad, and this just warfare tradition developed by Christians, which has become the basis of modern international law. Is that just warfare has the basic goal of protecting human life, right? Whereas Islamic warfare has the basic goal of advancing this ideology of Islam, and it actually doesn't really. Human life is secondary to that goal. Who cares about
that? To me, is the most important thing to understand. Everything else is secondary to that goal.
Right. So you can.
I'm running out of time for what I've got to do. I want to say, Andrew, please tell everybody, about your show and about your work and how they can support you in your work.
Oh, well, you can read more of these such writings. I'm, as I said before, Campus Watch Fellow for the Middle East Forum. And my writing appears at all sorts of outlets in conjunction with the Middle East Forum, like American Spectator, Breitbart, Daily Caller, Daily Wire. I also write independently for other individuals for specific projects, and my writings appeared at the National Interest and American Thinker, and I used to write for the Institute of Religion and Democracy at their Juicy Ecumenism website, and my writing has also appeared at the Religious Freedom Coalition and Washington Times, and also I'm a contributor as well at Jihad Watch. So if you go to Jihad Watch, you can see my writing there. I just had an article come out today, a book review on a book about Pope Pius V and his role organizing the Holy League that fought at the Battle of Lepanto in 1571 against the Ottoman Empire's fleet and defeated them there. That's 450 years ago in this anniversary year of 2021 on October 7th, 1571. So you can read me also at Jihad Watch, as well as you've indicated, I'm a fellow presenter with you at Global Patriot Radio, where I have a show called Conservative Casual Friday, where I like to interview individuals every Friday on important events of the week for conservatives. Others, you can tune in on Friday, or you can listen to the podcast later, uploaded online, and follow the interesting conversations I have with guests who come in to discuss important issues of the day there.
I say definitely you want to turn into Andrew's show. I do occasionally, and I just the quality of the guests make a difference. And I want to say thank you for that work. I'm enjoying listening to your show as well. Thank you, Andrew. I'll have to have you back soon.
All right, then. Thanks for having me, Paul. Till next time.